This 16-year-old murdered a 23-month-old baby. This is Dylan Shoemaker, and he was only 16 years old when he committed a terrible crime in 2013. He was babysitting his girlfriend's two little boys in Springfield, New York, and Dylan ended up fatally beating the older boy, who was just 23 months old. The little boy's name was Austin Smith, and Dylan Shoemaker punched Austin's head over and over to make him stop crying. And this caused Austin to have severe bleeding in his brain, and he died. On that awful night, Dylan Shoemaker was babysitting Ashley Sons, who was his girlfriend, while she was working her shift in a restaurant in Springfield. Dylan started to get frustrated with little Austin while babysitting that night. Austin wouldn't stop crying, and Dylan was afraid his cries would wake up the baby. So Dylan Shoemaker did something horrible. He put a pillow over Austin's head. Then he punched the pillow over and over and over. He kept punching Austin's head to try to make him be quiet. But this severe beating caused Austin to have serious brain bleeding. The bleeding in his brain would end up killing him, and Austin was almost 2 years old when he was killed. Dylan was arrested for this horrible crime, but he claimed it was an accident and he didn't mean to kill Austin. And during his trial in 2014, he broke down crying in the courtroom, pleading his innocence, claiming that everything he did was unintentional and it was just an accident. But the jury did not believe him, and they found him guilty of murder. Dylan was given the maximum life sentence of 25 years, though it was later reduced to a term of 18 years. Now, what I'm about to show you is the clip of Dylan Shoemaker crying and pleading for his life in the courtroom. But don't feel bad for him. Keep in mind, he murdered a 23-month-old baby.
I didn't mean to kill Austin. Ashley, I really didn't. I really think I did that. I didn't mean to hurt him. I can't take back what was done. I wish I could. I would give my life for Austin. I loved him.
A record will show that you admitted that on July 23rd, 2013, in a phone call to your mother from the holding center, you stated, and I got a quote from the court reporter, "I am a 16-year-old blonde. Probably all I have to do is cry in front of the jury, and they're going to feel sorry for me."
This man was drunk driving and thought he hit a fire hydrant, but it was actually a person. 22-year-old Jaquise Norton was driving his Chrysler in Las Vegas one night. He was driving recklessly and speeding, and he struck the Mercedes of a 52-year-old man. He killed him on impact, but Jaquise did not think he hit anything at all, or a person. He just assumed that he hit a fire hydrant. It just goes to show you that you should never drunk drive because you know you're not fully there. And deadly and dangerous stuff like this happens when you do it. Now, what I'm about to show you is the video of Jaquise finding out that he actually killed somebody and he did not hit a fire hydrant. This is both awful and sad because this 22-year-old just made one mistake and it probably just costed him his life.
Kind of important information that we need to tell you, alright? You know you're in an accident tonight, right? Yes, sir. You didn't hit a fire hydrant. You hit another car, alright? You killed a man. Okay, so you're going to be booked in for DUI death, alcohol, and drugs. You understand your charges?
Yes, sir.
You realize you hit a car?
I just hit a hydrant.
How much you drink tonight?
Three or four drinks.
3 or 4 drinks? You understand it's going to be a felony, right?
Kill somebody.
You didn't have no idea that you hit another car until we told you? What was y'all doing before the accident?
I was in the club. I was trying to drive home. I thought that I could. The antidepressants that I'm on now are changing my body. They're changing my tolerance.
When did you get on your antidepressants?
4 weeks ago. My life is over.
Your life isn't necessarily over, but it's definitely changed.
These are the most disturbing things ever live streamed. In 2016, 28-year-old wingsuit pilot named Armin Schmider decided to take his fans along on a base jump from a mountaintop in Switzerland. In his live stream right here, you can see him excitedly getting his suit and equipment ready. And he even says, "Today you fly with me." But he could have never have known that he was about to provide a first-hand POV of falling 5,000 feet to his death. After he concluded getting everything ready, he ominously waved goodbye to the camera. He stuffed it in his suit while still filming, and then he jumped from the mountaintop. For a while, you only hear the rustling sound of the wind and the suit. But then the followers were greeted with the sound that they never expected. Armin gained superstar status when he made a risky but successful jump that garnered over 13 million views on social media. Soon, he had a pretty big following that loved tuning into his adrenaline-inducing content. But they would have never have guessed that one of his jumps would be unsuccessful. The sound of the wind was then interrupted by a blood-curdling scream, and then you hear the sound of impact. The video fell silent with the exception of the eerie sounds of bells ringing, until you hear perhaps one of the most disturbing sounds ever. It sounded like deep labor groans, and in reality, what we were hearing was likely agonal breathing, which is a reflex response to the brain not getting enough oxygen. Typically during cardiac arrest, it's not a signal of suffering, and people are often unconscious when it occurs. But nonetheless, it's still extremely upsetting to hear. I wouldn't recommend watching the live stream or listening to the audio because it really is unsettling. You literally witness a man smiling and having the time of his life, and then minutes later, it all ends so quickly. Rest in peace to Armin Schmeider, and this death is just truly awful. These are things humans should never hear, Part 1. What I'm about to show you is a simulation of what happened to Alaskan Flight 261, following a catastrophic loss of pitch control, killing all 88 people on board. This is real audio footage of the plane going down between the pilots and air traffic control. The plane went inverted, meaning it was flying upside down, and just listen to how calm the pilots are. This is quite possibly the most brutal way somebody has ever died, and whatever you do, don't look up the pictures. Octavio da Silva was a 20-year-old soccer referee in Brazil, and on June 30th, 2013, he was refereeing a soccer game and sent off a player named Josmir Santos Abreu, who was 31 years old. He refused to leave the field and began a fight with the referee. Abreu threw a punch which made Octavio draw a knife from his pocket and repeatedly stab Abreu. Abreu died on the way to the hospital, and when fans watching the soccer game, including Abreu's family and friends, found out about his death, they invaded the field and stoned Octavio before decapitating him, and then ripping his limbs from his body with just their strength and no weapons, and then put his head on a stick in the middle of the field. And what makes this worse is that a graphic video surfaced online shortly after the incident, showing medical personnel reassembling Octavio's body. The videos and pictures are extremely disturbing, and I don't recommend looking them up. You will most definitely be traumatized or scarred. The way his limbs looked after being ripped off is extremely unsettling to look at, mostly because you see strings of flesh, tissue, and bone because it wasn't cut off properly, and it was just ripped off by pure strength of humans. This case is absolutely awful, but why did Octavio pull out a knife when somebody just punched him? If he didn't stab Josmir Abreu to death, he would most likely still be alive today. But just imagine being literally ripped limb from limb by an angry group of soccer fans, and there's literally nothing you can do as they pull your body apart. This is the scariest song in the world, and here's why. Okay, so we all heard this song before, especially if you're into scary things and watch the Insidious movies. But do you know the very chilling and disturbing backstory behind this song? Well, the song is called Tiptoe Through the Tulips, and it was recorded and released in 1968 by American singer Tiny Tim. And when the song was first released, it did not have the scary reputation it has now. However, this would change during his last ever live performance of the song. On September 28, 1996, Tiny Tim suffered a heart attack that was pretty miniature. While performing at a music festival, and after this happened, his doctors advised him that he wasn't healthy enough to perform again. However, Tiny Tim ignored the advice from his doctors and scheduled another concert at a women's club in Minnesota the next month. But right before his performance, he told his wife that he wasn't feeling good. Nevertheless, Tiny Tim decided to go on stage anyway. And after performing the last song of the night, he suffered a major heart attack on stage and died in front of the crowd. And the song he was performing was Tiptoe Through the Tulips. This song was already terrifying, but it's 100 times more terrifying after knowing this. Now listen to the song after knowing all this. This is the scary story about the family portraits. One day, there was a man who was hunting in the woods, and as night fell, he found himself in an unfamiliar part of the forest. He walked and walked, but he couldn't find his way home. Wandering aimlessly in the dark, he eventually came to a small clearing where an old ramshackle cabin stood. Tired and weary, he decided to see if he could stay there for the night. When he came closer to the cabin, he saw that the door was standing wide open. Poking his head inside, he could see that the little cabin was completely empty, but there was a bed and a fire burning in the fireplace. The hunter threw himself on the bed and decided to sleep there for the night. If the owner came back, he would ask his permission in the morning. Lying on the bed half asleep, he looked around and was surprised to see the walls were covered with paintings. They appeared to be family portraits, all framed and painted in incredible detail. They seemed very lifelike, and without exception, each portrait was uglier than the next. The hideous faces in the paintings made him incredibly uneasy. The way they were painted made it seem as if their eyes were staring directly at him. It was incredibly unnerving. He decided that the only way he was going to get any sleep was to ignore the hideous faces staring at him. So he turned on his side facing the wall and pulled the blanket over his head and drifted off to sleep. In the morning, when the hunter woke up to find the cabin completely lit up by sunlight, he looked around and noticed that there was no family portraits on the walls at all. There was only windows. These are people who abused animals reacting to their sentences. This is Elizabeth James, and what she did to a dog is absolutely disturbing. Elizabeth James moved in with her boyfriend and his mother at a place in Tampa back in August 2022. And the mother had an 8-year-old husky named Maya who was perfectly healthy. But suddenly, Maya began showing signs of abuse. The family veterinarian treated the dog who had punctures to her head and other injuries. Later, the family installed a hidden camera and caught Elizabeth James in the disturbing act. She was beating Maya with a rubber mallet. Elizabeth hit Maya with the mallet extremely hard 38 times, and even kicked and slammed Maya. Luckily, Maya survived and she continues to go to the vet for ongoing treatment. You can find the video online of Elizabeth hitting and beating Maya, but I don't recommend watching it because it's obviously disturbing. Now, what I'm about to show you is Elizabeth James reacting to her sentence of 6 years in prison.
It was so violent and disturbing, we can hardly show any of it. It shows Elizabeth James using a rubber mallet to beat then-boyfriend's family dog, a husky named Maya.
What she did to Maya for 151 days, my dog lived in fear. It's a living thing, and she just abused her over and over.
The family began suspecting abuse after Elizabeth moved in with them in August 2022.
Not counting the ongoing abuse, August of 2020, the defendant struck Maya 38 times with the mallet and 26 additional strikes.
That's at least 64 hits. Prosecutors point out that's just what was caught on camera.
I think it's a miracle that Maya's alive.
I've never done anything like that. I've never put my hands on anybody. But that doesn't excuse it.
I would impose a sentence at the guidelines, 70.8 months in Florida State Prison.
That's more than 5 years behind bars. Lopez says it's a fitting sentence.
This teenager was brutally executed by the cartel, and whatever you do, don't look up the video. The video that I'm about to explain has little to no backstory, but in some groups there's a vague backstory behind it, but I don't know how true it is. The backstory is as follows. Allegedly, the victim in the video is the son of a cartel boss, and the execution was carried out by a rival cartel in order to send a message. Some even claim the video was recorded so it could be sent to the father. What cartel did this disturbing act is a mystery and nobody knows for sure, and the cartel the victim is related to is also unknown. The video is 2 minutes and 27 seconds long, and the clip is recorded in the middle of the night in a desolate location. As you play the video, you realize that the sound is messed up. You hear the wind in the background, but not the victim talking. The victim can be seen kneeling on the ground, and he looks like a teenager. He seems to have his hands tied behind his back. He's also been badly beaten off camera that one of his eyes had become so bruised that it's swollen shut. A cartel member is standing behind him and is holding the victim's hair, propping his head up to look at the camera. You can see the victim speak, but you can't hear what he is saying. The cartel member stands ominously behind as he carries a combat knife in his hand. The poor teenage victim looks utterly terrified as he sits waiting for his life to end. Then, out of nowhere, 20 seconds into the video, the cartel member violently pulls the victim by the hair, which causes the victim to panic. He then takes the combat knife and begins to cut him on his trachea. Instantly, the victim is pulled to the floor and put on his side. The killer with the blade then cuts through the trachea as the victim grimaces his teeth in pain. Blood begins to stain the ground and the blade cuts through the victim's windpipe like a hot blade cutting through butter. All of a sudden, you then start to hear a sound, although it's very distorted. I think the person filming on the mobile phone may have had his finger over the microphone. You hear the sounds of labor breathing and the sounds of blood squelching. The sound is cutting in and out, and you also hear a few groans. After a few seconds, the blade is cut through the neck and the victim is almost half decapitated. However, you still see him trying to move and he continues to grit his teeth in pain. The killer then cuts around the sides and back of his neck and you can see the white of his spinal cord. It's utterly disturbing, and suddenly the sound gets louder and you hear horrific sounds coming from the victim. The sounds in these videos are always extremely hard to explain, but it almost sounds like violent snoring mixed with the sounds of bubbling blood. When the victim tries to breathe, it sounds like a straw trying to suck up the last drop of a drink. The killer has a tough time cutting through the spinal cord, so he takes the knife and lines the tip of the blade onto the spinal cord, and starts to use the palm of his hand to hammer the knife into the victim's spine. And you hear it crunch as it happens. The killer then takes the blade and begins sawing back and forth on the victim's spine, and this creates a horrible grinding sound. You then start to hear chatter in the background from a few cartel members. However, unlike the majority of cartel videos, the cartel members are quiet and whispering. They are not talking that much, and possibly the horrific nature of the act is extreme for them also, given the age of the victim. The beheading is then complete and the killer holds up the head to the camera. The lifeless look on the severed head is absolutely haunting as you see blood drip to the ground. The identity of the victim is unknown, as well as his age, but my guess is he is around 14 years old, which makes this case even more shocking. Even the behavior from the cartel members were strange, and they weren't like they are in other videos. This just goes to show the brutal reality of Mexican cartels, and nobody is ever safe, even with your age and status. These are twisted murder cases you've never heard of, and this is a massive trigger warning. This case takes place in Indonesia on May 12, 2016. Ino Ferrara was an 18-year-old woman who had recently graduated from a vocational school, and after graduation, she began working in an office of a plastics factory. The factory was some time away from her parents' home, but it did have accommodations for both men and women that was separated between genders. Ino lived in the company's accommodation just outside the factory, and every week she would return to her parents' house for a night or two and spend time with her family. Ino was the fourth of 7 children, and she and her family were followers of Islam. And because of this, she was arranged to be married to a man at some point. However, in April 2016, Ino was walking back to her accommodations after a day at work when she bumped into a teenager who was referred to on the media as R.A. The two talked and exchanged numbers, and for the next month, the two texted often and started somewhat of a relationship. At the time, R.A. was 16 and was a student at a neighboring high school. On May 12, 2016, Eno asked RA to come to her accommodation. She told him because of the arranged marriage, the month-long relationship had to come to an end, and the two decided to meet to say goodbye. At 11:30 that night, RA arrived at the women's section of the accommodation. Eno met him and at the gate let him in, and the two talked in her room. Inside, the two spoke for about 30 minutes and began to kiss, but before long, RA began to remove his clothes, but Eno told RA she had no interest in anything further. She was worried about the risk of getting pregnant and ignored his advances. Feeling angry and rejected, RA got dressed and left Eno's apartment. He then stood in the section between the female and male dormitories, and it's here where RA stumbled across two men, 24-year-old Ramad Hatano and 24-year-old Haman Hoparati. These two men worked at the plastics factory and stayed in the men's dormitory. The two men asked RA what he was doing, and he said he had been in a relationship with a woman who worked in the plastics factory, but the relationship had just come to an end. They all talked for a while, and the two men then wanted to see which factory worker was his girlfriend, and they then told him to take them to her room. There was a gate separating the girls' dormitories so nobody could get in, but RA didn't close it properly, so the three were able to get inside. The three then crept up to Eno's dormitory and twisted her door handle, and it was unlocked. The three then entered her room and stood over her as she slept. Ramad and Haman both recognized her from working with her. Haman had worked in the same section as Eno and had taken a liking to her. He even got her number from another worker and sent Eno messages, but Eno never replied to a message he sent. Ramad also knew who Eno was. He claimed that she called him ugly and that his skin was too dark. Iman then got one of the pillows off Eno's bed and placed it over her mouth and began to smother her. Eno then woke up and a struggle ensued. Iman then pulled a fork out of his pocket and began to stab Eno in the face multiple times, while Ramad pinned her down. The two men then ordered RA to grab a knife from the kitchen, however, he couldn't find one, so he went to the garden area and found a garden hoe. He came back to the room to see Iman still holding the pillow, which was now soaked with blood, over Eno's face. Iman then told RA to strike Eno in the face with the metal head of the hoe. RA then raised the hoe and struck Eno in the face once. This stunned her and she stopped resisting. Iman and Ramad then forced themselves upon Eno while RA stood guard by the door. After the two men were done, they told RA that it was his turn. He tried, but he wasn't able to. He would later say the blood coming from Eno's face turned him off, so instead he began to bite Eno's legs and breasts. Now, what I'm about to explain is absolutely sickening, and this is a massive, massive trigger warning. Ramad picked up the gardening hoe and inserted it into Eno's genitals. He then began to kick the metal head of the hoe, resulting in the handle impaling and rupturing Eno's internal organs, ending her life. 90% of the hoe handle had been kicked inside Eno. After killing her, the three took turns washing blood off their bodies. And before leaving the crime scene, they took Eno's things and phone and piled her clothes on top of her where her body was. They did this to mask the smell of decomposition that would happen in the next couple days. When Eno never turned up to work, her friends began to worry. They called her and texted her, but didn't get a reply. They then went to her place and knocked, but when Eno didn't answer, they broke into the place. And once inside, they were met with a disturbing scene. Police were called, and Eno's body was taken away and an autopsy was conducted. The cause of death was from massive internal bleeding caused by the garden hoe. 23 inches of the handle had been kicked inside Eno, damaging her heart, lungs, and many other organs. You can see the x-ray photo of this on the internet, but I can't show it on here, and it's awfully disturbing. In a matter of days, all three boys were arrested and charged with the murder of Eno. All three boys had a reason to why they killed Eno also. RA claimed he did this because Eno rejected him and he didn't like the arranged marriage. Ramad said that Eno had been rude to him, and Iman said that she ignored his text messages. The police then forced the men to reenact the murder, which was televised, and the video of the reenactment could be found on YouTube, and it is super disturbing to watch. Both Iman and Ramad were found guilty and sentenced to death by firing squad. RA was also found guilty, but due to his age, he was only sentenced to 10 years in prison. I also have to warn you that if you research this case further, images of the crime scene are very easy to find and they are extremely disturbing. What these 3 boys did to Eno is just horrific, and I can't even imagine the fear and pain she must have been experiencing. May Eno rest in peace. You did not deserve this at all. This might be the most disturbing young killer ever, and this case is just gut-turning. In 2011, Daniel Bartlam, who was 14 years old at the time, ran out of his burning house with his younger brother and dog, and they waited for the emergency services to arrive. When the police questioned Daniel, he told them that someone had broken into the house and harmed his mother and then set the house on fire. But after this initial statement, Daniel told the police the very disturbing and sickening truth. He said that he crept into his mother's room at night with a claw hammer in his hand. He then stood over his own mother while she slept, and as he looked down on her, he raised the hammer and hit her in the head 7 times. And after he was done, he poured gasoline around her bedroom and then set the whole room on fire. The disturbing thing is, Daniel's mother was only identified through her dental records, meaning her body was completely burnt beyond recognition. And as the police searched the house, they found the hammer used in the attack in Daniel's bedroom. And they also found a document on his computer where he written a story featuring a character with his name who murdered his mother. Another disturbing part about this case was that a popular TV show in the UK called Coronation Street had recently showed a story where one of the characters murdered a woman with a hammer. And the storyline in the show resembled a striking resemblance of what Daniel had done. The police also found TV clips of the scene from the episode of Coronation Street along with other violent scenes from popular films on Daniel's computer. The media then gave Daniel the nickname the Coronation Street Killer. Daniel's stepfather had also spoken about Daniel's behavior before the awful incident took place. And he said that Daniel had plastic boxes full of Star Wars and Doctor Who figures, and Daniel would just urinate in those boxes. Daniel also defecated all over his bedroom. And what's strange is that Daniel was raised by his mother in a very stable home, and by all accounts, Daniel was a normal young boy. The family had moved to a different area in 2009, and that's the year he began to become more reclusive, spending most of his time in his bedroom playing video games and watching horror films. His stepfather blamed the video games and the horror films on why Daniel murdered, but I don't believe that. Daniel said that he killed his mother because of an argument that they had when she called him a freak. But with no evidence of abuse in the home, the motive is still unclear. Daniel was then found guilty of the murder of his mother. This whole case is just so sad, especially because everyone that knew Daniel's mother said that she lived for her children and was a warm, loving mother. And for someone to do this to their own mother is just absolutely sickening. He turned the cartel's victims into soup. Santiago Mesa Lopez, known as the Stew Maker, worked for one of Mexico's most brutal cartels during their violent war with a rival group. His sole job was horrifying: to make bodies disappear. Using large industrial drums, Santiago would mix a caustic brew of water, lye, and other corrosive chemicals into this boiling concoction, and he would then dump the dismembered bodies of murdered rivals, letting them dissolve for hours until only a sludge of smudged tissue and small bone fragments remained. It was a gruesome, methodical process that erased almost all physical evidence of the cartel's mass killings. While the cartel waged its bloody war above ground, Santiago was deep in the shadows, cooking the dead, turning human bodies into unrecognizable stew. On average, Santiago claimed he disposed of 30 to 50 bodies a month. Sometimes the process took just a few hours, other times it took an entire day depending on the victim's size. In total, it's believed he dissolved over 1,000 people during his years of service. For this unimaginable work, Santiago earned just $600 a week. When he was finally arrested in 2009, he chillingly admitted his role without emotion. His capture stunned the nation and brought horrifying clarity to the thousands of missing persons cases haunting Mexico. Families desperate for answers hoped Santiago could tell them what happened to their loved ones. But most bodies had already been reduced to nothingness.